Regional Director for PASA, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture. And in that role, I am a co-creator of the Farm Lease Connection program, which is specifically targeted at beginning farmers. This new generation of farmers, and I hesitate to call them young farmers because there are people who are also transitioning from other careers and becoming farmers. What is distinctive about them is that they, in general, first of all, are highly educated, usually pretty sophisticated in terms of media, marketing, and information gathering, and less skilled in farming techniques. What they're drawn to about farming comes more often from a social and community perspective and environmental perspective, and they're motivated by wanting to do something that's going to have a positive impact on the planet, that may be community building, contribute to health and wellness, and they're not really driven to this sector by wanting to make a lot of money. So what we also find is that they're coming with skills and abilities and desire and passion, but not necessarily with a business orientation. What we see as missing is that focus on really managing their business, starting it, growing it, and managing it at every step with an eye to profitability. You know, conventional farmers, if they've been in the business for quite a while, can only stay in the business if they're making money. And we're concerned for this new generation that they're going to spend all of their time and energy on growing and distributing their food and not enough of their time on figuring out if they're making money doing that. Generally, the first thing that's going to strike someone as different between a conventional farm and a sustainable operation is typically going to be the scale. That the sustainable operations, particularly these beginning farmers or new farmers, are smaller. So for a vegetable operation, we may be very commonly finding people working 20 or fewer acres, 15 or fewer acres. So you're going to see less heavy machinery, lots more handwork, and also, of course, a reliance on organic or natural methods, so there's not going to be a lot of other external inputs, pesticides, insecticides, that sort of thing added to the farm. That makes these operations very labor intensive, and so labor is a significant cost because they're trying to do everything in a non-mechanized, non-polluting, off-the-grid, or environmentally friendly way. One of the motivations of this next generation of farmers, particularly if they're doing community-supported agriculture or CSA, is involvement. They want people to understand where their food comes from, to appreciate what goes into the creation of wholesome food and healthy food. And so that's where volunteers play a part in some of these landscapes. CSAs will often invite members to come and weed or sow seeds or harvest. And while that's wonderful because it does give people a feel for it, it can also be potentially a difficult part of their business model because relying on volunteer labor is not a very sustainable or solid foundation. One of the other areas that's a challenge is using apprentices or interns, particularly if they're unpaid or barely paid, and once again building your business model and your profitability on access to free or very cheap labor. We're seeing more awareness about that, more concern about that, and more, I think, interest in correcting that situation and making sure that anyone who's doing work is either being paid in kind, in the case of your CSA members, or your interns and apprentices, that they're being paid a fair wage for their labor. One of the directions that we're seeing the federal government move in is food safety, and that has real impact for small farmers. And certainly there's a need for regulation, but one of the things that PASA has argued for is to be cognizant of the fact that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to policy and safety rules and regs. That it can be prohibitive for these small growers to even get started if they have to have a really complex and extensive infrastructure to meet the food safety requirements. I think there's been some discussion about trying to hold down the cost of land, even in land that's already under ag easement, where the development rights have been sold. There are young farmers calling for caps on how much that land can ever be worth, just demonstrating more willingness to work with, to support, and to make happen the beginnings of these small growing operations, to try to have a better path to success and more resources available that will help young farmers get started. To have, we sort of jokingly refer to having like a GI Bill for farmers, that there'd be maybe some kind of tax breaks, or they would even have some relief from their student debt, ways that would remove some of the obstacles to them to get started in what is going to be a long-term, low-margin, long-horizon payoff, but basically something that needs to be done. We do need to have a next generation of farmers, and we need to make it possible for them to have a decent living in a reasonable time frame.